December 17, 1944, and Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison was burning alive inside his Sherman tank. The German Panther's 75mm shell had punched through the Sherman's armor like it was made of cardboard, and now flames were spreading through the crew compartment, eating oxygen and filling the space with black smoke that made his lungs scream. He could hear his gunners screaming somewhere behind him, could smell burning rubber and diesel fuel, and something worse he didn't want to think about. The hatch was right above his head. Just reach up, turn the handle, push. His hands found metal hot enough to blister skin, but he didn't care because the alternative was cooking to death in a steel coffin in the middle of Belgium while the Battle of the Bulge turned the entire Ardennes forest into hell on earth. Morrison got the hatch open and pulled himself through, dropped 10 feet to frozen ground that felt like concrete when he hit, rolled away from the burning Sherman as machine gun bullets kicked up dirt around him. 3 of his crew made it out. His loader didn't. The German Panther that had killed them sat 200 yards away, its long gun already turning toward another American tank, and Morrison could only watch as it fired again and another Sherman exploded into flames. They were 2 miles behind German lines now, cut off from their unit during the massive German offensive that had started yesterday and split the entire American front wide open. The forest around them was crawling with German armor and infantry, the temperature was dropping towards 0, and Morrison's crew was wounded, weaponless, and completely alone in enemy territory with absolutely nowhere to run. If you're into the most insane combat stories from WW2, hit that subscribe button because we cover battles like this every single week, and trust me, this story is about to get absolutely wild. What Morrison didn't know yet was that in 48 hours, he and his crew would be driving a captured German Panther tank straight through German lines, destroying 9 Tiger tanks along the way using Germany's own equipment against them, and nearly getting killed by American forces who thought they were the enemy. This is the story of how 5 Americans trapped behind enemy lines turned the tables on the Germans in the most unexpected way possible. Morrison and his 3 surviving crew members crawled through the snow toward a destroyed Belgian farmhouse about 300 yards from where their Sherman still burned. His gunner, Corporal Eddie Novak, had taken shrapnel in his left arm and was bleeding through a makeshift bandage Morrison had tied using his own shirt. His driver, Private Tommy Chin, couldn't hear anything because the explosion had temporarily deafened him, and his assistant driver, Private First Class Mike O'Brien, had twisted his ankle jumping from the tank but could still move. They reached the farmhouse just as darkness fell, finding the building half collapsed from previous artillery strikes but with enough of the stone foundation intact to provide cover and concealment. Through gaps in the walls, Morrison could see German armor moving along the road, tanks and half-tracks pushing west toward American positions, part of the massive offensive Hitler had launched to split Allied forces and recapture Antwerp. The night was the longest of Morrison's life because every hour brought German vehicles closer to their hiding spot, and several times he was convinced they'd been spotted and would be captured or killed any second. They had no weapons except Morrison's pistol with 8 rounds, no food, no medical supplies beyond the basic first aid kit Morrison carried, and no radio to call for help. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees, and they huddled together in the farmhouse basement, listening to German voices outside and the rumble of tanks on frozen ground. Morrison had been in combat for 7 months since D-Day, had survived the hedgerow fighting in Normandy and the race across France, but nothing had prepared him for this feeling of complete isolation behind enemy lines during a massive German offensive. Dawn came cold and gray, and Morrison was watching the road through a crack in the wall when he saw something that would change everything. A German Panther tank, probably 50 tons of the best armor Germany could build, was moving along the road when it hit debris from a destroyed truck and through its right track. The track snapped and coiled off the wheels like a metal snake, and the Panther lurched to a stop, completely immobilized right there in the middle of the road about 100 yards from where Morrison was hiding. The German crew climbed out, 5 men looking frustrated and angry, examining the damage and realizing they couldn't fix it without recovery equipment. Morrison watched through a pair of binoculars he'd grabbed when abandoning the Sherman as the German tank commander tried to raise someone on the radio, probably calling for a recovery vehicle. Then, about 20 minutes later, Morrison saw something he couldn't believe. A German half-track arrived. The Panther crew grabbed their personal gear, and they abandoned the tank right there on the road because German offensive timetables didn't allow for delays and recovery operations took too long when you were supposed to be advancing west as fast as possible. The Panthers sat there, empty and alone, looking completely intact except for the thrown track. Morrison's crew thought he'd lost his mind when he explained what they were going to do. They were going to capture that Panther, repair the track, and use it to fight their way back to American lines. Novak said it was suicide. Chun, who'd regained some hearing, said they didn't know how to operate a Panther. O'Brien pointed out they didn't speak German, had never seen the inside of a Panther, and had no idea if it was even operational. Morrison agreed with all of that, but then he asked them what their alternative was because they couldn't stay in the farmhouse forever, couldn't walk back to American lines through 2 miles of German-controlled territory, and would freeze to death if they tried to hide much longer. The Panther was their only chance, insane as it sounded, and if they were going to die anyway, they might as well die trying something crazy. They waited until dark on December 18th, then crawled across frozen ground to the abandoned Panther, Morrison going first with his pistol ready in case Germans had left guards. The tank was empty. Morrison pulled himself up and opened the commander's hatch, dropped inside, and found himself in a German tank he had no idea how to operate. Everything was labeled in German, the controls were different from the Sherman, the gun used different ammunition, and even the seating arrangement was unfamiliar. But the engine started when Chen, who understood mechanical systems better than anyone Morrison knew, figured out the ignition sequence by examining the controls and making educated guesses. The Panther's engine roared to life, so loud Morrison was sure every German within a mile could hear it, but nobody came to investigate because the sound of tank engines was constant during the offensive. The thrown track was the first problem they had to solve because without it the Panther couldn't move. Morrison found tools in the tank's storage compartments, probably left by the German crew, and over the next 6 hours he and O'Brien worked in freezing darkness to reposition the track, tension the wheels, and reconnect the pins that held everything together. It was brutal work that left their hands bloody and frozen, work that had to be done mostly by feel because they couldn't risk lights. But by dawn on December 19th, they had the track repaired and the Panther was mobile. Painting American markings was Chen's idea. They found white paint in the abandoned farmhouse, probably used for interior walls, and used mud mixed with it to paint rough white stars on the Panther's turret and hull. The markings wouldn't fool anyone up close, but from a distance or in combat chaos they might buy crucial seconds. Morrison also found an American flag in his personal gear, a small cloth flag he'd carried since D-Day, and he tied it to the radio antenna where it would be visible to American forces if they got close enough to friendly lines. Learning to operate the Panther took desperate trial and error that Morrison knew could get them killed at any moment. Chen figured out the driving controls, Novak learned the gun systems, O'Brien took over as loader even with his injured ankle, and Morrison commanded from the tank commander's position. The Panther's gun was 75 millimeters like the Sherman's, but it was a completely different weapon, longer and more powerful, with ammunition that didn't match anything they'd used before. They found a full ammunition load inside the tank, 42 rounds of armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. And Novak spent hours figuring out the gun's sights and aiming mechanisms while Morrison studied German range cards he found in the commander's station. The German radio was the wild card because it was tuned to German frequencies and they couldn't understand a word being transmitted, but Morrison realized this was actually an advantage. If they kept the radio on, German forces hearing them would assume they were friendly until proven otherwise. Morrison couldn't speak German, but he figured out he could use the radio to listen to German communications and get a sense of where German armor was moving even if he couldn't understand the specific words. The tone and urgency of German transmissions told him plenty. Their first combat in the captured Panther happened on the afternoon of December 19th when they encountered 3 German Tiger I tanks moving toward American positions. Morrison saw them first, spotted the massive Tigers rolling down a forest road about 800 yards ahead, and his first instinct was to hide because Tigers were the most feared tanks in the German arsenal, 70 tons of armor and firepower that could kill a Sherman from a mile away. But then Morrison realized something that changed his tactical thinking completely. The Panther they were driving was a German tank, and from a distance those Tigers would think they were friendly. Morrison told Novak to load armor-piercing and prepare to fire, position the Panther at an angle where they'd have clear shots, and waited until the Tigers got within 500 yards. The first Tiger never knew what hit it because Novak's shot punched through its side armor and ignited the ammunition, turning the 60-ton tank into a fireball that lit up the forest. The other two Tigers immediately began turning to face the threat, but Morrison had positioned the Panther perfectly and Novak was faster on the gun than the German crews. The second Tiger took a round through the front armor, a shot that shouldn't have been possible except the Panther's gun was just that good, and the tank stopped dead with smoke pouring from every hatch. The third Tiger got one shot off that missed by 10 feet, and then Novak put a round into its tracks and followed up with another into the turret that disabled the gun. 3 Tigers were destroyed in 90 seconds, and Morrison's crew was shaking with adrenaline and terror and the realization that they'd just done something impossible. They kept moving west, using the Panther's superior optics to spot threats before being spotted, and over the next 30 hours they encountered German armor repeatedly. Each time, Morrison used the same tactic because it kept working better than he had any right to expect. They'd approach German positions, let the Germans see a Panther and assume it was friendly, then open fire at point-blank range before the Germans realized what was happening. Near the town of St. Vith, they destroyed 2 Tiger II tanks, the even heavier version of the Tiger that was supposed to be invincible, catching them in a convoy and killing both before either could return effective fire. Outside Malmedy, they engaged and destroyed 3 more Tigers that had been supporting German infantry, and Morrison watched through his optics as German soldiers scattered in confusion when one of their own tanks started killing their armor. The Panther was better than Morrison's Sherman in every possible way, and he hated admitting it, but it was true. The armor was thicker, the gun was more powerful, the optics were superior, and even the crew comfort was better despite the German controls. Morrison could engage targets at ranges where his Sherman would have been helpless, could penetrate armor his Sherman could never scratch, and could take hits that would have destroyed his American tank. The Germans had built an incredible machine, and Morrison was using it to kill them. But the closer they got to American lines, the more dangerous their situation became because now American forces would see a German Panther and shoot first without asking questions. Morrison knew they had to time this perfectly or they'd be killed by friendly fire after surviving everything else. On December 20th, they reached an American roadblock outside Bastogne, and Morrison saw 3 M10 tank destroyers positioned to defend the road. The M10s spotted the Panther immediately, and Morrison watched through his periscope as the lead M10's gun swung toward them, and he knew they had maybe 5 seconds before the Americans opened fire. Morrison threw open the commander's hatch, climbed out while shells were already being loaded into the M10s, and started waving the American flag tied to the antenna while screaming that they were Americans in a captured German tank. An American officer was screaming at him to get back inside, probably thinking this was some kind of German trick, and Morrison could see the M10 gunner taking aim. Morrison kept yelling, giving his name and unit and serial number, explaining about the Sherman being destroyed and the abandoned Panther and fighting their way back through German lines. An artillery shell from German positions landed 100 yards away, close enough to throw dirt over everyone, and the American officer made the decision to hold fire and verify Morrison's story before shooting. The next 3 hours were complete chaos as Morrison and his crew were interrogated, their captured Panther was examined, and American intelligence officers lost their minds with excitement over an intact operational Panther with a full ammunition load captured behind enemy lines. The 9 Tiger kills Morrison claimed sounded like fantasy, like propaganda or desperate lies, but then reconnaissance units confirmed finding the destroyed Tigers along the route Morrison described, and the story started to seem impossible but true. The Panther was sent to the rear for technical analysis, eventually ending up at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where American engineers could study every detail of Germany's best tank. Morrison and his crew were recommended for Silver Stars, though the paperwork would take months to process. And within days, the story was spreading through every American armored unit in Europe about the crazy tank crew that captured a Panther and killed 9 Tigers. Morrison survived the Battle of the Bulge, survived the rest of the war, and went home to Kansas in 1945 with decorations and memories he'd spend the rest of his life processing. Decades later, he'd tell interviewers that the 48 hours in the captured Panther were the most terrifying and exhilarating of his entire life, that every second felt like tempting fate, and that he'd made peace with dying at least a dozen times before reaching American lines. He never claimed to be a hero, said he was just desperate and made an insane decision that somehow worked out. His gunner Novak would say Morrison saved all their lives with that crazy plan, that they'd be dead or captured if they'd stayed in that farmhouse, and using the Panther was the only choice that made any sense, even though it sounded completely insane. The captured Panther that Morrison's crew brought back to American lines provided intelligence that helped American tank designers understand German armor technology, influenced post-war tank development, and proved that even Germany's best equipment could be turned against them by determined troops who refused to quit. American engineers at Aberdeen studied every aspect of the Panther, learning about German armor composition, gun design, optics systems, and mechanical engineering, knowledge that would influence American tank development for years after the war ended. By the time the Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945, American forces had defeated Germany's last major offensive in the West, destroyed hundreds of German tanks, and proven that American troops could fight and win even when surprised and surrounded by superior numbers. Morrison's story was just one small piece of that larger battle, but it became legendary among American tankers because it proved something important about American troops, that they could adapt, improvise, and turn enemy advantages against them even in the most desperate circumstances. The Germans lost approximately 600 tanks during the Battle of the Bulge, including dozens of their best Tigers and Panthers, and never recovered from the losses in men and equipment. America replaced every tank destroyed and built thousands more. Thanks for watching this story about one of the craziest moments of the Battle of the Bulge. If you want more incredible WW2 combat stories like this, hit that subscribe button because we've got something special coming next week. Until then, remember the tankers who fought in the freezing forests of Belgium and never gave up even when everything seemed hopeless.